Hi guys, and welcome to Veteran State of Mind. Great to have you here in the new year. I think it's the first time we've spoken to each other, so happy new year. And I hope you have a great Christmas. If you've set resolutions for yourselves, goals for yourselves, I hope you are on the way to smashing them. And let's make this a good one. It's been a while since I did any kind of live event. I don't think, to be honest, off the top of my head, I don't think we've done one since pre-pandemic. But there's one coming up. You may be aware that I wrote a book called Voices of Victory, which is about the experiences of British soldiers in the 1945 campaign in Germany. I'm very passionate about spreading the word about this campaign because I do feel like it is one of those many forgotten campaigns that we seem to have. I do think it's the case that more often than not, campaigns are forgotten rather than remembered properly, to be quite honest. But here's one of them. A little bit of a story about this, actually. I'll try not to keep it too long. But, I was very lucky to go to Normandy for the 80th anniversary of D-Day. And you couldn't move, which is exactly how it should be. There's people everywhere. It was fantastic. And then I went to Germany for the 80th anniversary of Operation Veritable, which was the kind of the break-in battle for Germany. And there was a few of us. We went to the Reichswald War Cemetery on the 80th anniversary. There's 7,500 Commonwealth and British soldiers there, mostly British, a lot of aircrew, a lot of soldiers. And it was really disappointing to see that there was not a single wreath had been laid and there was no one else there but us. That's really sad. Really sad, to be quite honest. I found it quite upsetting, and it's nobody's fault. It's how these things go. It's very hard to keep track of every battle that the British Army has been involved in. Been pretty busy over the hundreds of years of the kind of our existence. And I do believe in being part of the solution rather than just whinging about it. So to that end, obviously Voices of Victory, my book about Germany in 1945 was part of that effort. And I've got to be honest, guys, I'm not really one for public speaking. I'm not going to go as far as to say that I don't enjoy it. I certainly don't really like being up on the stage. But if it helps spread the word about this campaign in Germany and gets a few more people in the know, then that's something I'm going to have to start doing and have started doing. So on February the 8th, the 81st anniversary, Aces High Gallery down in Oxfordshire, they have been very kind and have offered me a platform for the day. Some of you already told me from seeing stuff on social media that you're going to come. Thank you so much. And if you guys are interested in coming, if you're down that way or if you're in like a reasonable drive, please do come. It'd be great to see you. Do book sign and all that stuff. But yeah, I just really want to get the word out about this campaign, guys. It's that kind of old thing of, you tell one person, they tell one person. It's great that we remember D-Day and these kind of battles. They should be remembered. This incredible amount of heroism, sacrifice went on in those battles. But as we all know, that occurred in other campaigns too, in your Italys, your Burmas, and also in Germany. So yeah, if you can make it, that would be great. All right, that's enough waffling from me. Today's guest, she's a great friend of mine. She's a friend of the podcast. She is a returning guest. Her name is Alana Stott, and she is here to talk about human trafficking. So please give her a very warm welcome. Alana, welcome to the podcast, mate. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm excellent. Excellent, thank you. We have so many directions that we could take today's podcast. You are always up to a million things and doing it, every single one of them incredibly well. That's the last compliment you're getting for the podcast. So, but we're going to dig into, something that, to my shame, I don't really know too much about. But you you talk about this to me a bit when I saw you in LA when we were at Dean's Investiture, or rather the after party. And I'm
surprised you remember.
I had an app in a bush. I was all good to go. It's something that I don't know much about. I think it's probably one of the big problems that's in general people don't know too much about it, and that's the subject of human trafficking, what it is, why it is, what can be done about it. So giving you a very kind of open floor here to bring us into the subject.
Well, thank you for that, because that is actually really helpful. I think when I speak to a lot of people, they maybe know a little bit about it. They've maybe got a tiny bit of experience on some sort of angle, or they've watched Taken and Sound of Freedom and think they know everything about it. And that's a really good starting point for me, because if somebody's maybe, watched Sound of Freedom or watched these types of movies and think, okay, human trafficking is kind of a third world problem. It's something that is kidnapping at the back of a van and then somebody's forced into it. And then when you find the victim, they're going to be, thank you for saving me, you hero, then that's the kind of issue that we've got mainly. It's because people think that's what it is. 99% of kids, women that are taken now they walk freely in the hands of their traffickers. They're groomed in the process before, which is, I call it a kind of 7-step process of gaining their trust and isolating them. And once that kind of superiority is established by the trafficker, the victim generally thinks that they're doing it off their own back, for want of a better term. And that what then happens there's a huge lack of training amongst the people, the first responders, the people who are going to be first on scene, as to what a victim of trafficking looks like. So 9 out of 10 times they're going to get labeled as a criminal themselves, prostitution, be able to identify, knowing what it is. Training within law enforcement is not very strong when it comes to this area. So even what trafficking is in the first place, then what it looks like, then what you're looking for, then what trauma-informed care is when you're actually speaking to them to be able to get the information. It's a very, very, very easy tool, a very easy crime to get away with, because the victims are very unlikely to say anything about it. And a lot of people believe that that's through fear, that they're not going to say anything because they're in fear. But actually, a lot of it is more based on a kind of Stockholm syndrome effect of not actually even realizing that they are a victim.
Obviously, like, I know you've got to be protective of people's names and things like that, but could you give us like an example of somebody that you've come across who might have gone through those stages of being trafficked, and then maybe they had some kind of as you say, like they've been, I don't know if the right term is like mislabeled, mishandled by police forces, that kind of thing?
I actually, 2 weeks ago, I had a call from, it was actually began with a call from a journalist who said to me, his first thing he said was, I don't even know if this is a human trafficking thing, but this case has just happened. It was in North Carolina. The police officer's not quite sure what he's dealing with, and we wanted to get some advice from you. So I said, okay, tell me a little bit about the circumstances. And they said they think it's prostitution, but they're not quite sure if there might be a human trafficking element. So they said, the first thing they said was that they found a group of women in commercial sex acts. And then the first one that they spoke about was this young girl who was 16. So I stopped them immediately at that point, and I was like, we're talking human trafficking. And they were like, yeah, but she seems to be willingly there. I said, she's 16 and there's commercial sex. It's automatic. There's no question about it. She can't consent at 16. I know UK laws are slightly different, but at the same point, if I just talk America right now, we can't have consensual sex. So anything that is a minor and it's commercial sex is automatically human trafficking. If we then take that into the group of women that were in adulthood, they're all doing this willingly. But if I just take the one young girl, when they presented her to me, they told me maybe 4 facts about her. And from those 4 facts, they hadn't done this at this point. I was then able to go onto the National Centre for Missing Children website, and I found the girl on there. She'd been missing since March 25. We then went back through her social media, and I found who her pimp, for want of a better terms, I'm doing inverted commas here. We then found his tactics probably as far back as I think we were looking at like November, October time, where he'd contacted her, started establishing a relationship, getting her to switch over platforms, and building that trust, building that relationship where she didn't talk to her parents, where she was solely reliant on him for filling the needs. And then slowly her contact goes, she's cutting off on social media, and then by March she goes missing. So from March till 2 weeks ago, she was in the hands of this trafficker. But if you were to speak to her, she was with her boyfriend and just helping him out with some debt that he was in, or helping him out with some issues he was having. She didn't see this as, first of all, she doesn't see it necessarily as prostitution because she's not getting money, he's getting the money, but she thinks she's helping her boyfriend. She doesn't think that this is a trafficking situation. And she's not going to think that until she receives the care she needs. But when this happens, we went back years ago, there was a case, this wasn't my case, this was Dr. Sandy Morgan, who I work with here. And the young girl had been picked up, she was 14, and the cop that picked her up immediately recognized it as trafficking. He'd been trained in trafficking, he knew what he was doing. He took her to the safe house, and while she was in the safe house, the trafficker found out where she was, managed to get hold of her, got her back out. And then while she was out, he murdered her, and the cop that picked her up when her body found it, registered her as a prostitute. So how that then works is she's killed in the process of committing a crime. So there's a lot of things that then won't happen with her. So her parents can't get a proper burial. There's all sorts of things that go on there. But on her death certificate, everything is labeled as prostitution. So if the cop had known what he was doing, he would have immediately knew that this was trafficking and she'd been murdered and she was a victim, 100% victim. But when I never criticize the cops because it's just training. They just don't have the training. And it doesn't matter if we're in Orange County or, Midwest. The training standards, the average cop gets about 2 hours of human trafficking training in their career.
And how often, I guess, what are the kind of the numbers? Like how much of what they're getting 2 hours of training, for something that is, how much of a problem is it? Like, is this something that you could comfortably say goes on in every single town in the US? Very, very comfortably. If there is a demand for sex, there's a demand for paying for sex, there's a demand for prostitution, there's trafficking going on. So if there's a city across the states that doesn't have that, then no, but I'm pretty sure there is. In every single city, town, there's nowhere that's protected. There's nowhere that's protected by socioeconomics either. It happens in the richest of places, it happens in the poorest of places. There's nothing that protects you that way. And then the other side of that, this is like, we're talking motels, we're talking truck stops. Another big industry, probably one of the bigger industries right now, is the online trafficking. And this is when you'll do the exact same process. You'll get to know the girl, you'll meet her, you'll gain her trust, you'll fill a need that's missing, you'll isolate her, you'll do all these things. And then you'll say, look, there's a webcam business here that I need you to help me with. Will you, get online and do some things? Or even worse, I'm just going to film you anyway and not tell you it's happening. And then we've got webcam businesses, we've got like OnlyFans as well, but OnlyFans, there is certain criteria you have to get through there, but I'll give you another example of that in a second. But porn sites and these types of things, it's very easy to upload any video. The reason I say about OnlyFans has an issue is because they do pay their content creators, but a huge amount of OnlyFans girls have a manager, and that manager takes 80-90% of their fees sometimes, and there isn't any current protection for that. So when it comes to trafficking, then is it overwhelmingly for the sex industry? Is that what you'd call it? Or is it?
No. So there's about 50 million slaves as an estimate in the world, and I've been in this industry for 25 years, and we were talking 20 million, 25 million. I think even 5 years ago, I was still talking in the low 40 millions, and we're now at 50 million. So trafficking is commercial sex, labor trafficking, domestic servitude, organ harvesting, and commercial sex probably accounts for about between 10 and 20 million, I would say. I said the numbers pretty varied, but there's 10 million that are children, and that can often be either forced labor or sex.
I'm just shaking. There's a few things I want to dig into on this. The best way to go about it. Let's just touch on that because I'm sure it sounds like something out of the movie. The organ harvesting. Where's that happening?
Organ harvesting there is a demand for organs. That's kind of a given, that we know that there's a lack of organs for people that are sick. People are willing to pay for it. So there's a couple of examples. And this is a big effect on the veteran community. You will find a lot of veterans will get into labor trafficking, and then once they're kind of done with, then we can use their organs to sell their organs. Does it happen in the US and the UK? There has been cases. There's definitely been cases in both the US and the UK of organs being taken for someone else's purpose and paid for. But it is generally where there's a lesser governance of medical care. So I don't like to name and shame countries, but there is some countries that will be affected by it more. Then I'm not going to name and shame, but China does have a large amount of it going
on. Again, I'm not trying to shame the country, because I know it's not the fault of the people living there, apart from the ones committing the crimes. But I did hear a story from a journalist, and I was just wondering if you'd heard it and if you knew if there was any truth to it, about Mexican women being murdered for their infants, for those kids to be sold.
So it does happen for sure. Like, there's definitely people that are murdered for their children. Generally, they're not, though, because they're still quite useful. There's baby harvesting can go on. So babies can be grown, but they're not generally going to kill the woman because she's still useful, unless after that she isn't useful. A lot of the times we see harvesting of stem cells. There's a huge demand now for stem cell treatment. And there's, I don't know whether I'd say most, but there's reputable clinics out there that take it from properly donated umbilical cords. Like, we know where they're coming from. But there's a lot of them, when you go, let's get some cheap stem cells, then you've got to ask, where is this coming from? So there's a certain stage of the fetus, the aborted fetus, that is very strong in stem cells. So they can get women pregnant and then use the so I think every conspiracy theory comes from somewhere. So when it comes to things like, oh, they're drinking baby's blood or they're doing this, it's not quite true, but we can get to that angle by these types of things. And we get the stem cells strongly from umbilical cords or fetuses. So where there's a demand for something legal, there's a demand for something illegal, and they see that there's a huge demand, and they see that Westerners are going to pay a lot of money for stem cell treatment. So when you're looking at a clinic, I know a lot of people are doing stem cells, and it's really beneficial, and it's doing amazing things for injuries and things, but just look out where you're getting it from. Ask them, tell them. They should be able to show you exactly where it's sourced, the agreements that they have with the clinics. It could be, sometimes it's abortion clinics and things, but as long as the mothers kind of agreed to it, or even in some cases mothers agree to give their umbilical cords for it. So there is processes where it's happened and it's all legit, but there's a lot of it being not so legit.
You mentioned, like, is it 7 stages or 7 stages? Can we go through what those are, please?
Yeah, so they're going to select their victims. So how they're looking for that is people that are pretty isolated from friendships, or even spend a lot of time online on their own, or there's something about a person who can, and this can be, you know, a person who's abused, a person who's on the street, a person who doesn't have parental support. And that can come from, as I say, the impoverished areas, or, you know, the kid who's basically living in a 10,000 square foot house and in the bedroom on his own all the time, or her own all the time. So we select them by that kind of standard, like what is their living circumstances like and how much support do they have around them. Then we kind of want to fill a need. So what's missing in their life? And it might be money, but it might be just love, support, nourishment. It could be anything. So we're going to kind of fill that need. We're going to gain their trust. So it's
so to interrupt, but by we you're talking from the perspective of
from a trafficker. Yeah, being a trafficker right now. And then after, so where am I? Select, secure, satisfy. So we've gained their trust. We're now going to isolate them. You know, don't tell anybody else. Don't speak to anybody else about this. This is between me and you. You know, I'm the only one you can trust, etc. They're going to have to sexualize the relationship somehow. So they're going to be, you know, adding things in that might seem kind of slightly strange, but we'll just make it normal. We'll make it normal to just talk about sex or sex parts of the body, or just general talk about sex is slowly going to go into the conversation. I can't remember if I said secrecy, but we're building secrecy. So everything is, we're going to move them away from public apps. We're going to take them into private chats. If they're on things that can be found by other people, we'll pull them away. Supremacy is the kind of final stage where we've got total control over them. So we've completely isolated them. We've built all the trust. We've filled their needs. We've taken away every piece of outside contact that they could have, and now they're in our control completely. And that's generally the stages, whether we're talking about grooming to abuse a child or grooming to traffic a person. Those are the stages that are pretty common throughout every circumstance. And then once they're in that stage, once the supremacy stage has been hit, then they're in full control. Like they're not going to listen to what anybody else is saying. They're not going to turn on this person. This person is God to them, and now we can get them to do whatever we want. And the process is followed by pretty much every case I've ever come across has followed that same process.
The last guest that we had on Veteran State of Mind grew up in a cult, and he was explaining how his parents ended up in a cult. They didn't come together. They kind of came separately, and it sounds really similar here in this now. The same kind of things, that people are either isolated, they've been hurt. Someone comes in and starts giving them attention and starts giving them, you know, quote unquote answers and a place to belong. And then, you know, maybe some differences here, but also on a bigger scale, you know, there's a group of them, but isolating that group from the outside world. So in his case, he wasn't allowed to watch the television and, you know, listen to the radio and that kind of stuff. So is it kind of fair to say that, like, a lot of these principles are kind of the same ones that people would use for trying to do that? To be honest, this is a bit, I'm not saying that this is fully the case, but there's also parts in this that remind me of how some people are recruited into the army, quite honestly. Am I wrong in saying that?
I often compare it in the way, and it's same as extremism as well. You know, it's the exact same process that they're following. When I speak about grooming, I speak about the whole process. And I also would probably note that the process of everything that I just described there, every part of it, even the sexualization part, is completely legal. There's nothing illegal about grooming a person until you actually get to the abuse stage. Even then, that's dubious. But what we find with, and this was one of the reasons, and I won't jump ahead to this, but one of the reasons I started working with sexual trauma victims in the same way that we work with veteran PTSD care, because what we're finding is that they're young, vulnerable people who are at a loss for being part of a tribe. They're at a loss for community. They're at a loss for just any general nourishment that a person needs. somebody comes along and is like, we can fill that need for you. We can help you. You know, come join our tribe, be part of our community. Now you're in here. Now we've got you. Now we've convinced you that our way is the right way, and that, you know, put the uniform on, and you know, as in that could be like, you know, the underwear or the military uniform. And then we're going to get you to do something, and you're kind of going to know that it's not really the right thing to do, but we're asking you, we're your family, we're the ones who love you, so will you please go and do this? And it's almost, you know, when I speak to traffickers, when I speak to veterans, it's like, it's one and the same. Then when we finally like rescue you and say, look, you're leaving the military, we've rescued you from trafficking, and it takes a while, but eventually you're going to be like, shit, I just done some really bad stuff and I don't like any of it, and my head doesn't know how to process that, and I feel all messed up by it. And then I'm just going to, how am I meant to live a real life now? Okay, I'm going to drink alcohol, I'm going to get into fights, I'm going to do all sorts of crazy stuff, so I can't really live a normal life. It is literally parallel when we go through it as to what a veteran goes through and what a trafficking victim goes through in those types of ways.
Right. So you find it's, even when people get out of these terrible circumstances, they then, I'm gonna use the word choice, but I know obviously that's not quite what it is, because people, you know, are responding to things that have been done to them, triggers that have been done to them, that kind of thing. But people will go through the same thing of self-medicating, self-harm in a sense, and all that kind of stuff. And so even when they're out of that situation, they're in a different but new, dangerous in its own way situation.
Yeah, often a veteran, when they suffer PTS, it can be a TBI from a blast, or it can be something that's happened that they've witnessed visually, like whatever it might be. When and I'll apologize for being crude, but like 20 to 30 guys every day for 5-10 years, when your body's been through that much desensitization and much pain, and a lot of the times there can be physical violence, and a lot of the times there's huge amounts of drug. In fact, majority of the times there's huge amounts of drug use had to happen to get them through it. Definitely injuries below and internally. You're left with these unbelievable physical and mental scars that there's very little to help you with when you go out there. So you're going to turn to things. Everybody reacts in a different way. Every veteran behaves in a different way. Every trafficking person relates in a different way. And it can be that they go into complete solitude and be a recluse, drink alcohol, take drugs. They could be acting out violently. They could be acting out sexually even. There's a million different ways that the body responds to the trauma that you've been through. And then maybe if they're lucky, they'll do some talk therapy, or they'll do something that maybe someone's recommended to them that they're able to get through insurance or whatever. But we know that deep of trauma takes so much more therapy and so much more help. And when we bring trafficking victims through the likes of psychedelic medicine, the journeys are really horrific. They're really, what they have to release is really tough to deal with.
Is there a lot of danger of people then going, once they're out of these situations, putting themselves back in, because there's almost that comfort in that life of, you know, the same way as some blokes always are chasing the dragon and will go and volunteer to fight wherever around in the world because they can't cope with being back out in the civilian world. Is there a similar kind of thing with traffic victims?
Yeah, I mean, most traffic victims as well, when they do get out, they've got a criminal record because they've been wrongly labelled as prostitutes. I mean, right now there's 80,000 women in prisons in the US for prostitution, and we know that over 90% of them are victims, and I would probably say even higher. But, you know, so they've got a criminal record, they've got a previous drug addiction, there's nothing else for them. So more drugs, more homelessness, and then, you know, sex has become so desensitized to them that if they have to sell themselves for it, it's very, very hard to get out on your own. And then often when we find them, they do pass and they can get through that stage of, okay, now we're become clean, we're not going to do that anymore, we're going to do things. they'll end up with somebody who's not going to be very nice to them. Like they almost are attracted to violence and attracted to abuse, and there'll be, you know, some violent guy or somebody else who's going to harm them in some other way. It might not be trafficking, but trying to get someone from that life to a better life is very hard without help.
Is there anything being done about, like, that's insane that there's so many of these people who are victims who are being locked up for it? Like, what is there anything being done on, like, at like a government level? Is there anybody putting forth bills or anything to try and get these people seen in the way that they should be seen?
Some, but not as much as there should be. I think that we've looked at different models, and I think when things start to come in, like religion and certain types of values that they believe, like many people, especially in America, believe that almost in that kind of biblical way of the women being the kind of sorceress who's coming in and tempting these very sweet, innocent men into this level of depravity that they don't really want to do, but they're talked into it. So I think until we flip that switch and say that this is the human trafficking industry is a supply and demand. If the demand isn't there, then we don't need the supply. The reason that it's so heavy in the States is because the demand is so high. And when we've had a long line of punishing the victims, it's very rarely the pimp. It's even way less likely that the, again, quote unquote, John is going to get charged. It's very, very likely that she's going to get charged. And it's very likely that she's going to have a long list of charges against her. Then add the drug charge, or maybe if she's carrying, then they're going to have a weapons charge there as well. So a lot of people will be highly against the legalization of prostitute. I'm not. Not in the way that full it should be fully legalized, but the victims, the women, shouldn't be the ones being punished. And as an example, Finland have put this into operation where the buyer is the person who's most likely to be punished. If anybody's being punished, it's going to be him. And the woman instead will receive mental health treatment, drug treatment, maybe a stay in a rehab center, whatever is needed to get her in a better headspace. So right now in Finland, there's 234 women in prison altogether as a whole. And most of these have committed some sort of violent crime that's not a sexual crime. There's no women that are getting put to prison for prostitution. And that's taken down the reoffending rate. It's taken down the crime in the country. Women are being treated like they should be treated when it comes to sex crimes. Here, it's more like a punishment. You know, you go to prison forever, how long you have to do, and then you come out, and then you have to struggle to get back to any sort of life. If you have your kids are taken from you, there's no real help. So yeah, there is a few laws. I mean, I'm pushing for GAPA, which is the Grooming Accountability Prevention Act, and that's making grooming a crime. And the reason I want to do that is because if we can stop it at the grooming stage, then we stop so many women getting into this position in the first place. And you know, things like, if we look at, you know, a popular figure would be Andrew Tate. You know, his program and his, you know, self-confessed ways of working is grooming. You know, the whole process that he does to get women to do to so he can make this money is grooming, which is legal. So he's not committing a crime by doing that. There's a lot of things that he said that don't fall into the legal realms, but again, that's for the courts to decide. But when it comes to grooming, he fully admits to all those stages of grooming. And if we could kind of stop that, then we could stop a lot of women. As I say, 99% know they're traffickers. So we could take that out by making grooming a crime.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like even if someone was morally opposed to what women are, I say again, what they're doing, you know, it, like, I'm trying to put myself in a position of this person's the one in the wrong. She's doing it she's in the wrong. But if you think that, and you don't want that to be going on in your city or whatever, it just sounds like the way to guarantee that it continues is to then treat that person as a criminal, make their circumstances more difficult. So it's even if someone is in that position where they see a victim here as the actual culprit, it doesn't even make any sense then to
no.
make
I mean,
it's just going to perpetuate it.
To me, the law should exist to protect people, protect other people. So if somebody has to go to prison, it's to stop them harming other people, or to I understand the punishment of it, but if somebody commits a crime that, if somebody steals some diapers from a store, they're clearly needing to steal that because their baby needs diapers, and maybe we need to just help that person rather than punish that person. But the same thing, like we're not doing any service to the community. I think in some sort of weird draconian way, they think that by taking this girl off the street, they'll stop men wanting to do this thing. But as I'm saying, like, I speak to veterans all the time about this, and I say, I know you've traveled the world. I know you've been to places that maybe have looser rules on prostitution or strip clubs or whatever it might be. Have you ever been with, I'm not asking if you've ever been with a prostitute, but have you ever been with a trafficking victim? And every single person will say, absolutely not. Like, what are you talking about? I would never, ever, ever go with a trafficking victim. That's disgusting. Like, it's horrible. Like, it's an evil crime. And then I'll say the same thing about prostitution. And I'll be, yeah, maybe I've done that. Yeah, maybe I've tried that. And I'll say, well, there's a very, very, very high chance you've been with a trafficking victim. And then they're like, well, how do we know then, Alana? How do we know if she's there willingly or if she's being forced to do it? And the truth of the matter is there's no way to know. It's very, very unlikely she's there willingly, but there is no way to know if she's been groomed into doing this, if she, however the process is that she got there, if she's being forced outright to do it. Even then you won't really know because she'll be too scared to show you that. So the only way to ensure that you're not going with a trafficking victim is to just not do it in the first place. And that then goes, and then we could go really, really deep into like what sex should really be about and love and pleasure and everything else. But I think that because we just get into this really dark world right now of instant gratification on everything, everybody wants to be satisfied immediately and there isn't any work put into anything. When that's, another reason that human trafficking keeps growing and things aren't getting any better.
What, if any, effect does, like cities like Amsterdam, well, I say cities like, I don't know if there is other examples, but say Amsterdam, does that make a positive, negative, no difference to trafficking numbers in those kind of countries?
You could probably sit here with 10 trafficking experts and they would all tell you something completely different. Some people are fully against it because it's almost glorifying glorifying prostitution is almost saying, well, and then you'll have another person who will be like, well, yeah, her body, her choice, she can do what she wants to do. And I'm kind of fully in that camp. If she wants to do that, then fine. I struggle to believe that somebody really does make that as a full choice. But even then, if she decided that, yeah, this is my full choice, then we have to kind of look at who's earning from it. If there's, somebody who's taken 10, 15% to ensure her security and to make sure she's good and to make sure she's safe, is that a good thing? Probably, yeah. If she's going to do it, at least make sure she's safe and she's got the right protection and everything. If there's somebody taking 80, 90% while she's making 10%, then we're into abuse there. There's an abuse of power, there's abuse of control, there's the energy exchange isn't right. So again, I think I could answer that question in 10 different ways. I think that countries like Finland, they've done it very similar to the Netherlands, but just without this out and out promotion of it. It's worked very well for them. They're the number one country in the world right now, I believe. But they've not done it in the same way that the Netherlands have done it, which is more of a promoting kind of way. Because then you look at somewhere like Vegas, where it is legalized but very, very, very much exploited, and nobody's coming down on the people that are exploiting the girls, and that there's no help being out there for them. I think with the Netherlands, at least, they do get help, and there's therapy and there's counselors and there's people that can talk to them. And if they don't want to be doing that, then they're out and they can get out of it. So you could probably take like Finland, Netherlands, Vegas, and then some, small town, Midwest town that completely doesn't believe in legalizing it yet. It's very, very active in that city.
Let's talk a bit more about what you're talking about with working with police forces to recognize these things. Can you tell us a bit about that kind of work and what the problems are and like if you've been seeing noticeable differences from the training?
Yeah, I think so. I have a training program that's for kids. So it's 4 to 7-year-olds, 8 to 11, 11 to 14, 14 to 18, and then teachers, educators, and parents. And I was talking to someone in Missouri about it. They were an attorney general, and they said they didn't understand what trafficking was. And when we talked about it, they had the full opposite of idea of what it actually is. So I said, well, what if I put a training program together for you so you could understand it a bit better? And then we talked about their law enforcement. And then I said, maybe we could do something there. I ended up working with the Human Trafficking Task Force and the NYPD. And the guy there was like, Alana, we just don't get the training. Like we kind of know what we're doing, but there isn't a lot of training out there. And then we went through the police training program and they get the 2-hour mandatory training. Anything else they would have to go and do themselves. And that, anything that they have to do outside of their own work, that includes, drug training, gang training, any kind of crime that they're going to have to come across, they have to go and do that training. So unless they're very, very specifically interested in human trafficking, they've probably not done any training on it. So when it comes to the various codes, like the federal codes, remember in the States, they've got the federal, the state, the county, they've all got different laws. That's a lot of training that they've got to do. And then, as I say, they've got to understand what's a victim, what does a victim look like, how do we identify that in this 5-minute bust that we're doing of a motel. So I said, well, let's develop a training program that won't take you too long, that you don't have to pay for yourself, and it can just take you through those steps. Is exactly what you'd be looking for if you went into a trafficking situation, exactly what you're looking for when you go into something that you suspect is a grooming situation, so you don't know if it's gone further or not. And that's what our training program does, is just do those really kind of first 10 minutes interviewing skills, like what questions do you ask, how do you, when you've got the and I keep saying pimp, but just because it's understandable, but let's just say the pimp and the girl are in the room together. Like we need to get them apart. We need to do the interview. Like what does the room look like? Like how much access to clothes, outfits, her phone? Does she have access to her own money? Like who's controlling the situation? Who's controlling the narrative when they're speaking? These types of things you do in the first 10 minutes. When most people are going, okay, she looks to be there willingly, so we're going to arrest her immediately. And then you've immediately broken that trust. Whereas if you can, even if she looks like the most foul-mouthed, angry, like drugged up person in the world, treat her like a victim and treat her like we want to get information to this bigger network that's going on here. I guess they call it trauma-informed care, but it's just trying to get, for me, it's, you're going to get more information out of somebody with, the carrot rather than the stick. So that's even just to those basics. So have, being able to judge a room, being able to do interview skills, how to help with their trauma as well, because if you're busting down a door, you're adding to any trauma that's already going on there, isolating them from the person who's doing this to them and getting as much information as you can. And then we do a whole program. We do a whole other program on mental health care for officers too, because so many times they're doing something that they'll see things that they don't need to see, especially when it comes to kids or images or any of these types of things. If we're looking at online trafficking as well, they're going to have to go through these images and see the things that they might not want to see, especially if it's with minors. So we do a whole program on officer mental health.
And if anyone listening to this is a law enforcement officer or working in government and stuff like that, can they access this course?
Yeah, so Blue Rose is my foundation, bluerose.foundation. If you click on there, the ACT course is on there. And And I think right now it is up there. You can just access it for free. We're going to start programming it out to a few departments for the departments to try and push it out amongst their guys. And yeah, I mean, I probably spoke with 4 different departments in the last 2 weeks, and every one of them I spoke to didn't know what trafficking was. So it's nothing that anybody, I never be like, oh, you should be ashamed of yourself for not understanding this. How could you? Because it's so complex. It's such a difficult area to deal with. There's no reason that you should know what you're looking at.
And what about, I mean, I know it's something that I'm not a parent myself. I'm sure a parent never doesn't even want to think about these things. So I understand if people don't want me to ask this question, but I feel like I should, is how can people make sure, not just parents, but just people, if you know people in your lives, how do you look out for the signs of trafficking? How can you make sure that people aren't vulnerable targets for it?
But to the first stage of grooming is the isolation, and it's very, very. I've got 3 kids myself. I know how busy life is. It's hard to sit and talk to them. It's hard to get them away from their phones. Or, the first thing I say is don't do what is something that people want to jump into. As soon as I do a presentation, it's like, right, I'm taking away their phones. I'm blocking the Wi-Fi. They're not getting access. And we know that doesn't help. We know, and I always use the analogy that, when we had the guy in the kind of flasher Mac in the park in the 80s, we didn't take all the kids out of the park. We took him out of the park and dealt with him. This is the same thing. We can't just take them off the internet and take them away from all these things that their friends are doing. We just need to make it a safer playground for them. And we need to be able to, if your kids are young, yeah, you should have access to their phones, not to be like trying to catch them out, but just check what they're talking about, check who they're talking to. Anybody talking about moving them from apps, or is there somebody, going into their DMs and trying to get them to go to private conversations? The only way you're really going to do that is just communication with the kids. And it's funny because I'll say something like as simple as sitting down at the dinner table and having dinner. You can get the information that way. How's your day? What have you been up to? And make it so easy for your kid to tell you. And that's the next point, is if they do tell you, don't react, don't go crazy, don't shout or scream. Can you imagine someone like my husband, if he hears something he wants to, and I almost have to pull him immediately, because our kids have been contacted online, but all it is thank you for telling me, like, we'll deal with it now, and keep that cool. And it's hard. It's a really difficult world to live in right now. And I had one guy who came to me after it was a family office event, so a kind of high net worth group of people, and he said, there's something that's going on, but I don't know if it's grooming. I'm not quite sure. Like, would you be able to check it out for me? And I checked it out, and it was 100% grooming. And it was a female teacher to his young boy. And I went through all the stages with him, and I showed him what was happening with his conversations. But again, it wasn't his teacher. She was another teacher, but she was a teacher. And it wasn't illegal. That was the problem. Like, we couldn't do much about it because it wasn't actually illegal. And he was like, I'm just not sure, because you can't really tell by what she's not being like sexual towards him, or she's not doing, but each stage was very visible in the messages that he sent. And then one of the specific ones there was when she tries to make him do something wrong. Like, she was trying to convince him and saying and doing things that were, that would be classed as illegal. So that's another part of it, is they especially when it comes to boys, like, get something on them. Make sure that you've got something on this person that maybe, especially with the high net worth, it would be like that would shame the family or come that way. So he was able to kind of stop it in its tracks there, and he was able to cut contact. But what was funny about that one was the ex-husband of this woman wasn't surprised when it all kind of came out. And that's another interest, and that's another reason I want to make grooming illegal. We might not be able to get them on the first time that they do it, but when we start to see the pattern of it happening with more and more children, then the police might be able to do something more about it then, if there's a law.
I should have asked you at the beginning of the podcast, but why is it that you are so passionate about this, and what kind of drew you towards your kind of advocacy in this area?
So I guess I was sexually assaulted when I was younger. My mum passed away when I was young, and I looked after myself for a long time. And then when I was 17, I put the two men to prison that had done that to me. And during that process, I spent a lot of time in victim advocacy places, and there was a victim advocacy place in the courthouse where I was at, and they were like a lifeline to me. They were amazing, like just being able to go to that room and talk. But during that, I also learned how underfunded they were, how little help they get, how little any assistance of any kind. And then, so straight away from after the court case, I joined the Rape Crisis Centre because I wanted to help other people that were going through it. And then that was really where I learned about trafficking and about there was kids being abused and there was different things going on. So it just kind of grew from there. And then it was the more I saw that women struggled in this area, the more I wanted to do something about it. And it's just grew and grew. And I think probably 2010 was when the Haiti disaster hit. And I saw some of my colleagues going in to try and help kids there. And she had a price tag on her head, like they were going to take her out. And I was trying to get security to go and help. Dean was still serving at this time, and we couldn't get anybody to do it like for free, less than like ridiculous amounts of money to go in and help this lady who was trying to secure an orphanage being set up for under 5-year-olds to be trafficked, and we couldn't get help. So I was like, we have to do something about this. That's when I then trained in close protection with Dean and started the security company, and we were able to combine all those things. And a lot of times I was like, I want to do the task forces, I want to do the rescue stuff, but no, I don't want to be rescuing people. I just want to stop it happening in the first place now.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. You mentioned movies that have kind of warped people's opinions. For anyone that's kind of watched those and maybe formed the basis of things on them, what are some of the kind of the misconceptions that those movies push out? You kind of mentioned some of it at the top, but I just kind of wanted to hit on that again.
Again, it's kind of a hard one, and I know that there's a certain group of trafficking organizations that will really hate on those types of movies, and I don't blame them. The one movie in particular, I think 254 million at box office and made a lot of people very rich, and none of that money trickled back down to the people who actually needed it. But did it bring awareness? Yeah, it bring some people to understand that trafficking was in existence, but in the way that they want it to be in existence, which is they're going to kidnap our kids, they're going to put it in the back of the van, they're going to do these things. And then this white hero man, sorry, I don't mean to say white man, but he's going to come in.
You're thinking of Dean.
Fiery wall, and his big muscly arms are going to pick up the kid through the fiery wall and save them. That's not what happens. And when we do look at rescuing children and doing these things, these are systematic, long-term, huge processes that go through to do full rescues. And I hate this glorification of one person to, I don't know. It's just, to me, there's so many people doing amazing work in the preventative, the education, and they're very, very underfunded because there's a certain group of NGOs that are very vocal, they're very good at their media presence, they're very strong out there, and they get a lot of the funding, but very little is actually done because they're focused on that one or two rescues that they can get the glorification for. I think the people that are doing the amazing work, they don't take any credit for it, really. I'd say I don't like to badmouth anybody in the industry, but yourself, with everything that happens, there's always people that want to have that who I done it. And there's an act recently that happened here. It was called the Take It Down Act, which was a young girl, Ellie, somebody had taken some images of her at 13 and they put it onto Pornhub, and I think it was a video as well, and she had to fight to get this taken down. She's 13 years old, and it took her, I think, don't quote me on any of this, I think it took her 6 months just to get Pornhub to reply. And then eventually she fought to get this taken off, but she realized that there was a bigger problem here, that this was happening all the time, that there wasn't enough moderators on Pornhub, there wasn't enough people protecting kids. So she done this huge campaign where she fought to get the Take It Down Act, which meant they had, again, don't quote me exactly, I think it's like 14 days they have to get it taken down, which is still quite long. But again, I'd have to check the stats on it. But once she started gaining traction, her and her mum like really worked hard to gain the traction on this. A lot of people started getting involved. Like when she'd done all the hard work, a lot of people were happy to stand next to her and take her picture. By the time the act actually got passed, which I think was earlier this year, she wasn't even in the lineup of people that were taking the glory for it. She'd kind of been pushed to the side. And then there was, again, I'm not going to name them, but there was some NGOs and there was some politicians who were taking full credit for what she had done. And she's still out there doing her thing. She's still doing amazing. She's not shouted. She's not bitched about. She's just like, yeah, let them take the credit. Like, I've got what I wanted, which was the Take It Down Act has been approved. But that's the type of thing I speak about, is like a lot of people want that kind of glory moment. And to be honest, let them have it as long as the job's being done. But if we want to talk about trafficking, we have to talk about it in the right way if we want to make the change.
Yeah, I mean, and full credit to her. You mentioned plant medicine earlier as a way of people being able to not only overcome that trauma, but break the cycle so that they're not going back into this. Can you talk a bit more about that, please?
Yeah, I could, from personal experience myself, what happens when you go through sexual trauma is you'll often end up with something else that will come with it. And it could be things like self-harming, it could be eating disorders. And for me personally, it was eating disorder. And I had an eating disorder for most of my life. And one of the major things was I abused laxatives and I'd done anything. This was my way of self-harm. I would do these things. And I'd kind of got the eating disorder in I can't remember what the word is, intact, something like that. In check, that's the word. I'd got that in check after, having 3 kids and becoming a mother. You're obviously protective of the baby, so you do the things that you got to do. But the one thing that I never really got control of was the laxatives, because I'd been taking them since I was very, very, very young, and my body relied on them now. So that was doctors who told me that was the way it was going to go. Like, that was just how it was. I had to take them every day now, sometimes up to 20 a day. And when I found the medicine through the work that I was doing with my husband, and then I started working with other veterans, and then we were seeing the healing powers there. And in my first journey, I realized like how trauma was floating around my body and had always been floating around my body. And then another journey, it kind of showed me how my body was working. And then one in particular, it said, look, this trauma is basically attached itself around your stomach and around your bowels and everything around there. And that we kind of need to release it. And like during a journey, I released the trauma from there. And it meant I released all the men who had hurt me, like anything that was there, like left my body, and I physically saw it all going. And from that day, I've never touched another laxative. My body just started working again. Just physically, my body was working and it was healed. And then the mental healing, obviously, from releasing all that pain and all that shame and all the trauma and all the guilt and everything that leaves you, not only gets you to a place of, okay, I've healed from that sexual trauma that sat with me for 25 years, but I'm also able to enjoy the things that I couldn't enjoy before. Sex, after you've been, however sex starts in your life, that kind of stays with you for life. So if you've started off with very bad sexual experiences, then it almost stays with you for that. With psychedelic therapy, you can not only reprogram the brain to get rid of those traumas, you can actually reprogram it to start to have a healthy, pleasurable sex life, which is something that most women who have been through trafficking or sexual abuse or childhood abuse never think they can get to that stage. They can only hope to be healed from the trauma, but never get to a stage where they'll actually enjoy it. So I started studying this more, and right now I'm studying for a doctorate in clinical sexology, where we're going to concentrate on this side of it, because the work that's been done with veterans on the neuroplasticity and how they're healing from addictions and PTSD and all these other things, that same studies are reflective on sexual trauma studies and how that's all come together. So the studies have already been done. We're just jumping off the back of them to say like how we can heal. And it might sound insignificant to people that might be listening going, who cares if we're going to heal from sexual trauma? But how we can change the world by changing generations of people that have been abused and hurt. And this is male and female. I'm not just talking about women. I'm talking about men that have been, institutionally abused or this has been going on for generations. If we can heal those generational traumas, then we can actually start to make differences in the world. And people that have been through psychedelic therapy, do you see them ever going to war again? I don't.
Not unless someone invaded their back garden kind of thing, yeah. Right? That's the thing. It doesn't turn them into, I can't defend myself, but certainly not, I want to go and kick a stranger's door in for a laugh.
Yeah, I think once you've been through psychedelic therapy, I think that your mind is way more open. So that whole brainwashing, that whole institutionalization, Stockholm syndrome, it's a lot harder to do that to a person. So it's not to say that they won't do it, but they need the reason. They need the right reason, and they're not just going to take someone's word for it. And I would also put a caveat to say that what I just said there about them not wanting to do war, it doesn't make them weaker. The best samurais didn't want to go to war, but they were very, very capable of it if they had to. I think that the medicine makes that. If you talk to Dean, I'm sure you've talked to Dean about it yourself, he's stronger than he's ever been. And the biggest fear he had about psychedelic therapy was that it would make him weak. Well, it's 1000% made him stronger.
All right. Well, mate, thanks so much. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up? I've learned a lot on this. I'm sure other people have too, and a lot of it's really hard to hear, to be quite honest. I think that people go through this, but it's good to know that there are people out there actively trying to not just pull people out of it, but stop it happening in the first place, and that there are ways for people to heal from it. I think that's incredibly important. But is there anything else that you'd like to say on this or anything before we wrap up?
Yeah, I would say that I'm not an expert. I've been doing this for a really long time, but there's going to be people who have got very different opinions to me, different ideas. Human trafficking is the second biggest, and sometimes it hits into the first, but second biggest at least industry in the world. And there isn't a university degree that you can go and take to learn about it because it's just not being talked about. It's not being learned about enough. So when I say I'm not an expert, I'm learning every single day about new things, new ways, because trafficking evolves all the time. So don't just listen to what I'm saying. That's what I'm trying to say here is go and get information from as many different people, sources, ideas, listen to people and open your mind. But for your own self, just keep your eyes open. I've got a great friend, Andrew Wallace, who's got Unseen. He wrote the Modern Slavery Act in the UK. Incredible person. And he says that each person contributes to slavery about 6 times a day without knowing it, from the clothes they wear, the phone they have, where they wash their car, where they get their nails done, these types of things. He's a great person to listen to about what trafficking is and how each person does have the ability to end it if they can just become more conscious.
All right, guys, that is it for today. As ever, please do share the episodes if you've got something from them, if you found them valuable. And if you want to square our guests away for giving up their time, then help them please spread the message and the causes that they're putting so much time into. We will be back next week with another episode, war story episode. Until then, be good to yourself, be kind to each other, and we'll catch you again very soon.